Fantastic Four is being hailed and glazed as one of the best Marvel films that has ever come out. People are saying that it is one of the most interesting and unique stories to come out of the MCU, and that we are finally getting excited for new Avengers movies. But is the Fantastic Four First Steps as good as people are giving it credit for being? Let's find out. I'm Andrew, I'm a filmmaker, and I've directed over 10 films, and a movie reviewer with over 100 movie reviews on my channel. Today we are going to examine Fantastic Four, look at the good, see if there's any bad, and determine where the MCU is going to go from here. Spoilers ahead. Starting off, I want to talk about how I think Fantastic Four is a really great story about motherhood and mothers. I think that seeing Sue Storm in her element as a mom and the power that she gains from her motherhood is something so beautiful that we have not seen in the MCU in quite a while. I think the last time we really saw a story like this was in Multiverse of Madness, and the rest of the movie around that wasn't so great. So it was really refreshing to see such a positive take on motherhood from the MCU that we have not seen in a while, and I really enjoyed that. I think that it was really cool to see a hero focused on saving someone that was the smallest and the most helpless person that she had care of. And that was a beautiful thing. And I loved that the family dynamic was built around the baby. We had Ben and Johnny, who were the fun uncles for the baby, and obviously Reed Richards as the dad, who's trying to figure out what it means to be a father. And, you know, I loved that we got to see a little bit of each of these characters trying to figure out their role in helping to care for this new baby and this new life in the world. It was really cool to see a family in the MCU working together and coming together to be a team and be a family together. I think that was some of my favorite moments in the movie, were when the family was enjoying themselves and having that playful banter with one another. The message of this film being, you know, when a family comes together, they are unstoppable, was a really cool thing to experience. Additionally, the movie did delve into the theme of what would happen if the world came together and tried to collectively save humanity. And I think that was a very noble thing to go for and to try and tackle. But I think that the one thing that I would say that I wish I had seen was to see the people who were holdouts. We got to see that Latvania and Doctor Doom, they were not present when the world was voting to help on the raw materials later in the film, and it was so small and so subtle that genuinely most people would not catch it. And I wish we had seen a little bit more of a holdout of people who actually wanted the world to end, people who were very okay with the world ending. We didn't get a ton of that. I want to talk about the fact that if they go up on stage at the Oscars in 2026 and they give those golden figurines to the production design and the costume design for this film, for Fantastic Four, I will stand up and cheer and I will clap, because the production design and the costume design for this movie were absolutely incredible. Coffee break. I could absolutely live in the world of New York and the world that they created for the Fantastic Four to live in. Everything from, you know, the doors, the windows, the rooms, the cars, everything felt very retro but also futuristic at the same time. And I really thought that the sets were so cool to look at. Apparently Herbie the robot was a real robot that was controlled off screen by someone, and I think that was so cool. I can't imagine how much fun it was to be an actor and be acting against this little robot that's actually moving and actually reacting to what you're saying on set. So you could definitely tell that the actors were having so much fun in the sets and in the costumes that had been created for them. And then when they left Earth and they took more to the sci-fi area and um, the alternate areas that they went to, not going too deep into spoilers, I think that that all looked very cool and very interesting as well. I definitely think that the set design and the costume design, the production design needs to be praised for this movie because I think it was absolutely very well done. And then that translated into the visuals for this film being very beautiful as well. I remember that there were so many people who were very concerned about the CGI for Silver Surfer, myself included, because it didn't look that great, and we were all wondering, was this going to be something that was just horrifying to look at? And I can say no. The visual effects for her looked incredible. She was very, very well done. And there was obviously, I think it was, they were using some unfinished footage, so there was cause for alarm, but allay your fears when you go to watch this movie because it looks so much better than it did in those first trailers. I think that the CGI for the most part looked very finished and very completed, and that was really, really great to see. We're finally getting to this point, I think, really kind of starting this year, it feels like, where CGI is feeling finished again, and it's not feeling rushed and half baked, as it were. The only two things that I didn't particularly care for were the CGI baby and Mr. Fantastic, and I understand how hard it is to CGI a full character, so the baby did not bother me as much, but my fiance and my sister, it bothered both of them quite a bit. I particularly have never really found Mr. Fantastic to be a compelling character to watch his superpowers on screen, and so I was glad they didn't put him too much in this movie because the the visual effects were minimal when it came to him. Something else that I really thought was absolutely incredible in this film was Michael Giacchino's score. He This man does not miss when he makes his scores, and he is a very underappreciated composer. Normally when people are talking about the big composers of our time right now, they're talking about Ludwig Göransson, Hans Zimmer. Those are the two names that come up most frequently, but when you look at the library of music that Michael Giacchino has done, it is such a vast breadth of films that he has scored, and he deserves so much more praise. And Fantastic Four was great as well. I loved the vocals, and I loved the way that the music flowed through the film. It was beautiful to listen to. The acting was really solid throughout this movie. I loved seeing Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm. She was definitely far and away my favorite character of this movie. I liked seeing Joseph Quinn as Johnny Storm. I was very concerned about him going into this movie and how, mainly because I saw him last in Gladiator 2 and I was not a fan of him in that film, and so I was worried about his acting in this. But my fears were unfounded, and it was great to see him on screen, and I think he did a good job as Johnny Storm, the parts that he was given. Ebon Moss-Bachrach, as I probably absolutely butchered that name, please feel free to correct me in the comments. As Ben Grimm, he did a great job. I liked his portrayal of Ben was really good. It was very subtle, and the focus was never on Ben, but what we got of him I thought was really good. I thought that Julia Garner as Shala Bal was also very well done. I really liked getting to see her portrayal of the character. She was very stoic and impassive, and it was really interesting to see a little bit of her backstory and to find out more about this character that we haven't really seen on the big screen. We've seen, Silver Surfer from Rise of the Silver Surfer, but that was long ago, and this felt like a different iteration of the character, and I really liked that. And then I think Ralph Ineson did a great job as Galactus. He had some really interesting things to deal with, and I liked getting to see this portrayal of Galactus on screen. This movie had really good bones. I think that it had really solid characters, solid acting, solid directing, a solid story, and a solid villain. My only problem is that nothing was ever elevated to something that would make this stand out. And so I'm going to take a second now and I'm going to stop praising this movie and I'm going to talk about some of the things that I had issue with. So if this is where you want to leave, by all means feel free. If you enjoyed the movie, great. But I'm going to talk about some of the things that I think did not work as well for this movie. The biggest thing is the 30 missing minutes of this movie. This is something that is being hypothesized and has been apparently confirmed by several different people that there are about 30 minutes of this movie that are on the cutting room floor where they just had to be removed from the movie. Matt Shackman, the director, said that this did not contribute to the story and that's why they were cut, and that it was not something to do with Marvel. This was his choice, which I'm very glad to hear. I'm always a fan of the director having the say on what stays in the film and what does not stay in the film. But for me, I think that the 30 minutes that are missing from this movie would have fleshed things out a lot more. In particular, there was not a ton of growth or change for any of the characters. And if in those 30 minutes there were parts where we got to see growth and change and more character from each of these beautiful characters, I think it would have made this film more interesting. As it is right now, all of the characters are very flat, and flat characters equals a boring movie. That's not to say that you cannot have flat characters. There are movies with flat characters all the time. But typically, when you have a movie with a flat character, you have another character that they are constantly interacting with who is growing and changing over the course of the movie. So you still have character growth. It might just not be from the main character of the film. And the reason why we want growth and change is because that's how we relate to characters. Because we're always growing and changing, we can relate to characters who also grow and change. Or if we are not personally growing and changing at the moment, we yearn for that growth, we yearn for that change. And so we need that to be able to relate to characters. The second big thing that I have issue with, and I think the 30 minutes would have helped with, is that the pacing is abysmal for this movie. The movie had some really slow moments where it was really losing me. The beginning of the film was pretty slow up until Silver Surfer arrives and then they move to Earth. I felt like we were waiting for something to happen. We were waiting for some kind of inciting incident to happen. And then from the moment they got back to Earth until Galactus arrived, it just felt like we were trying to hit plot point after plot point after plot point in order to get Galactus to finally arrive. There never really felt like there was a ticking time bomb, partially because you could not tell how much time was passing in this movie. And so because there was no clear distinction of how much time was passing, you didn't know, how soon Galactus was arriving. They had the thing where they would tell you how close Galactus was every time, but it felt like he traveled from some far distant galaxy to the edge of our galaxy, and then it was like it took him like 20 minutes to get there, and then it took another 20 minutes for him to arrive from the edge of our galaxy, or sorry, from the edge of our solar system to Earth, and the times just felt really off. I never felt this tension that they were running out of time. The other thing, which I kind of hinted at a little bit earlier, is that I found it really hard to believe that the entire world would just go along and would come together and we wouldn't have any stragglers. Like, there was very little effort to try and convince the world that everything was going to end. It was kind of like the Fantastic Four arrived back. They were like, yo guys, we talked to Galactus, he's gonna destroy our planet. And then they went off and came back and said, oh yeah, and so we're gonna basically need the entire world to come together and use these materials to build these teleportation portals so that we can teleport the Earth somewhere else. And no one questioned them. No one, like, the trust that this world has, the entire world, mind you, not just the United States, the trust that the world has in the Fantastic Four to just go along with everything and say, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We completely believe you, and we're going to divert literally the entire world's economy, shut off the power every single night to save as much energy as possible in order to save the earth from something that is from this like giant entity that is coming to eat the earth." That felt just a little far-fetched to me, and I think that potentially in those 30 minutes was a little more of, people who needed some convincing, and there was a little bit more that we could have seen. I felt like this movie had so much time that it was trying to cover, and in the process of covering so much time of like, before we even know that we start off the film finding out that Sue Storm and Reed Richards are pregnant, and then by the end of the film the baby has arrived and Galactus has come, and then they defeat Galactus. That feels like such an incredibly long stretch of time. I wish we had shortened up that beginning just a little bit so we could focus more on the conflict of this world is ending. How are we going to come together? And how are we as a family going to come together as a family to stop the world from ending? And that kind of leads me into the fact that there wasn't a ton of conflict. Like, there was obviously the big conflict of Galactus is coming, the world's going to end. But there really wasn't a lot of conflict amidst the family, the Fantastic Four itself. There was a little bit of conflict between Sue and Reed over the fact that Reed had considered the baby maybe being worth giving to Galactus to save the Earth. But that was like one conversation, and then she shows the baby to the world and was like, "This is my child and I don't want to give it up." And everyone's like, "Oh yeah, no, I totally understand." But then there's no fallout. There's no like deep discussion between the characters. They don't actually dig into that at all. We just got the incredible surface level of like, "I can't believe you're doing this." "Well, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of like that." And then she's like, "Well, let me show the world my baby." And then that was it. Like, there really wasn't anything that we got to dig deep in with these characters and find out what they're struggling with in the moment. They briefly hint at something with Johnny and being like a womanizer, but we never see any evidence of that. We very briefly hint that Ben is struggling with his self-identity, but it's so subtle that if you did not already know Ben's story, you would not know that that was something he was struggling with. Again, I genuinely felt like this movie had really, really good bones, but there was no flesh, there was no sinew connecting it together. We just didn't have any of the connective tissue. And like the depth that we wanted in this movie to get out of it. And I don't think that's the worst thing. I think that this was still a really fun movie. It could have been better, and I wish it had been better. The other thing, which is just for me as a filmmaker, because I noticed it really badly, was the sound design for this movie. It was really rough for Reed Richards, The Thing, and Galactus. Now, for Reed Richards, this is probably because with all of the films Pedro Pascal is in, Gladiator 2, Eddington, this movie, Materialists, and the Last of Us Part 2. I think between those 5 things, and he's probably also working on Mandalorian and Grogu. Between all of those properties, he probably did not have time to come in and do a ton of re-recording work. And so I could hear line to line as they switched microphones on him, and it started to really take me out of the movie. And so that was a very minor thing that it could have also just been how my theater was mixed, because sometimes the mixing for certain theaters is bad, but that really took me out of the movie. I wish that The Thing's voice had been a bit more gravelly. I wanted to hear his voice be a little deeper, and I wanted Galactus to sound bigger and more intimidating, but he really wasn't, and so that kind of bothered me a little bit. Speaking of Galactus, I think that he kind of felt like a very weak villain. I'm not super familiar with the comics, and I'm not super familiar with Galactus, but to my knowledge, he is this person who is the destroyer of worlds, who has this eternal hunger, and he needs to constantly feed. And I the implication I've always gotten of him is that he is genuinely bigger than a planet. And so when he comes to a planet, he can just engulf that planet. And so him being so small was a letdown. I didn't get the intimidation factor from him. And that on top of the fact that the Fantastic Four defeated him so easily in his first movie, dude, what are we doing with like these big ultra big villains from the MCU? Like why are we letting them be defeated so easily? First it was Kang in Ant-Man Quantumania. Now it's Galactus in the Fantastic Four First Steps. We're having these villains that could be incredible threats to our heroes later on down the line, and we're wasting them early in these movies, and so they're just not that impactful and intimidating later on down the line. I really felt like this movie was playing it safe. This movie was the epitome of safe. There were no risks taken in this film. There were no crazy choices, which is probably a direct result of the fact that so many of the films in Phase 4 and Phase 5 have been received so poorly by the fans, and rightly so. Like, they have been very lazily done or very poorly put together, and so it felt like they cleaned this movie up to the point where there were no rough edges to this film whatsoever. And that, I think, is problematic, because if you take the analogy of, like, you know, a knife that you're throwing at a wall, if you take all the rough edges off of it, if you take all the sharp edges off and you throw it at the wall, it won't be able to stick because there's nothing to make it stick. And so I think back to Thunderbolts, which came out just a couple months ago, and that movie was rough and it had some risks that it took, and that stuck the landing a lot better for me. It was a lot more emotionally impactful than the Fantastic Four was. Finally, I want to talk just briefly about Mr. Fantastic, because I got a lot of backlash on this when I've made some videos on social media already talking about how I didn't particularly like Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, and I've gotten a lot of backlash about it. People are saying that, well, you don't understand that he's like this in the comics, and he's comic book accurate. And to that I say, good, then I do not like the comic book version of Reed Richards. And a character does not need to perfectly be adapted to the screen in order for it to be a comic accurate character. Like, you can still retain the essence of a character that probably reads better on the page than having to watch a bland version of that exact same character on the screen. I think it's also because I'm tired of seeing Pedro Pascal on the screen right now. I would have loved to have seen a different character playing the role. So I wanted to just say that really quick, because I'm not a huge fan of Pedro Pascal and how he portrayed this character in the movie. I think he is a really good actor. I love him as the Mandalorian. I loved him in Materialist. I thought he was one of the best parts of Gladiator 2. But I did not get him in this movie, and I didn't like him in this movie. So he wasn't a character that I was interested in watching. Now, let's compare Superman to Fantastic Four First Steps. You may be saying to yourself, is that fair? Is it fair to compare, this movie that's starting the DC universe to this movie that is in Phase 5 or Phase 6, who knows what phase we're in anymore, of Marvel? And I think yes, because they were released 2 weeks apart from each other, so the filmmakers and the studios were asking for us to compare the movies to one another. The one, Superman, is going to be very fresh in your mind when you go watch Fantastic Four, if you've seen both of them, which I have. And so I think that it is worth comparing the two movies together. And I think that it was very interesting because I had almost opposite reactions to the movies when I left the theaters. When I left the theater with Superman, my initial thought was, wow, I really enjoyed that film. And here are some glaring issues that I had a problem with. But over a couple of days, I thought to myself, wow, those issues really didn't seem that bad to me. And overall, the feelings that this movie left me with were much more important. When I came out of Fantastic Four, I was thinking to myself, wow, that was a really fun movie. I can't think of any issues with that movie whatsoever. And then over the next couple of days, my thinking was, ooh, those are some glaring issues that are slowly rising to the surface and becoming more and more apparent as I think about this movie more and more. I still liked both movies, and I will rewatch both movies, but I think Superman is the movie that I would prefer to watch 8 times out of 10 than this movie. Both of these films are films that are signaling a rebirth for their respective studios. Superman is the rebirth for DC. Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four are heralding the rebirth of the MCU, and I think that both of these are looking like they're going in a much better direction. I'm much more excited to see where both of these studios take their superheroes now that both of these movies are out. We're starting to see the MCU level out. We're going from, a couple of years ago with Ant-Man Quantumania and Thor Love and Thunder, two of the worst films that the MCU has ever produced, to the worst film this year being Captain America Brave New World, which really did not feel like the worst movie in the MCU. It felt like a movie that was bottom half for sure, but a movie that definitely could be watched. And now with Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four First Steps, we have two really great movies that I think that have made me interested in what's going to happen with the Avengers next and what's going to happen with movies going forward in the future. I'm finally excited to see what's going to happen next. I'm finally excited to see where we're going to go next and what these characters are all going to do. I know I just spent like 10 paragraphs talking about what I think was wrong with the Fantastic Four First Steps. And that is because I care about this movie and I wanted to see it be better. But I still really enjoyed it, and I still would recommend it to people, and I would still go watch it again. I would go watch this movie again in theaters because it was a very fun experience, and I would like to experience it in theaters again. But in the overall scope of superhero movies this year, I wasn't expecting to rank Fantastic Four below Superman and Thunderbolts. This movie really just feels like... This movie feels like the plain donut in the box of donuts. Like, you still are getting a donut, but you put it in with a mixture of other flavors, and I'm going to overlook it, and I'm going to pick something else. So I would rate the Fantastic Four First Steps a generous 7 out of 10. Definitely would rewatch, but I wouldn't choose to rewatch it often. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of this year. So if you could hit that subscribe button, that would really help me out. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this movie, and I'm excited to hear all your thoughts. I'll see you guys on the next one.